YouTube is an audio-visual narrative storytelling platform. TV producers make audio-visual narrative stories. This is your platform. This is yours. You have to be there. Like, if you're not there, why? You're already in this space. You just need to see it as owning a relationship with the people who love you. They're the people who want to work with you or the people who love your shows. Why wouldn't you want that relationship? TV people, by definition, are practitioners. They are craftspeople. They are makers. That's the word. Production. To be in this space, you have to get into it. And once you get into it, you realise very quickly, A, there's a lot to learn, but B, this is not rocket science.
Jen Toffing, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited to talk to you. Your Substack, The Business of TV, is one of the most informative sources I have found of someone talking about all the changes we're experiencing in the media. And you have the voice of someone who understands the industry and you understand the changes. So I found it incredibly valuable. Everyone just needs to get onto your Substack and subscribe. But one of the things I've really loved hearing you talk about is YouTube and the new media space. So I really want to dig into that with you today and really talk about the opportunities for producers in this space right now. What is happening at the moment in the business of TV?
It's pretty crazy, isn't it? I mean, it feels like a colossal upending in many ways of how the business of television works, how people make money, audience demand. Some people feel that it's sort of a temporary situation, that it's something that, we have this upending happening now, but it will return back to normal. And I think that isn't the case. There are two major trends happening right now. One is called fragmentation and the other is called convergence. And if you can understand those two key principles, then all of it sort of becomes much, much clearer. If you think back when the internet first emerged, pretty much the television was left alone. That we had the telly. Telly had the telly. It was our space where we could broadcast content and people would watch it. There was a handful of channels, however many there were. And then along came film. Maybe there was VHS or, you could maybe do a bit of download to own in that space. And then there's games. So then along comes Xbox and PlayStation and a bit of gaming came into the television. But in general, that was our environment. And the internet largely was on devices, wasn't it? It was on computers, it was on mobile phones, it was, the emergence of tablets and things like that. But what's actually happened is the television set itself has become connected to the internet. And by becoming connected to the internet, everything changes. Because it means not only can broadcasters stream programs to audiences in that living room, so can anyone else. And so you've got YouTube. We see the rise of the streamers in Netflix and Apple and Amazon and all of the other players. Never mind a whole host of other providers. It might be streamers who are making arts programming or, indie cinema or music or anything, any other part. It's all sitting there inside that television set. And that television set is now the place where the big competition is happening. So fragmentation means just a lot more choices. Think back to when we were young, there was probably only, a handful of TV channels, handful of radio channels, magazines, newspapers. Now there is more choice than, you can poke a stick at, all drawing on our attention. And that breaking up of our attention, all our attention into little bite-sized chunks means it's harder to gather an audience together to actually make serious money. And the serious money is what's needed to pay for the programming that audiences have come to know and love via broadcast TV, via networks and via studios, as well as obviously via streamers. So that fragmentation is real and it's not changing. The other side of it is convergence, where before you've thought, oh my goodness, well, I'm in telly. Telly's different to film, and film and telly are different to newspapers. It's different to radio. It's different to all of these other media types. Well, now everything is becoming this sort of one amorphous blob sitting in the middle. Podcasting, you might have viewed as different to radio, but oh, hang on, radio stations are making podcasts. Then it becomes publishing, and books become audiobooks. Well, they're sitting on the same platforms as the podcasts. Then you've got podcasts now sitting on YouTube. Well, we thought YouTube was different again. And then suddenly you've got YouTube with podcasts, and now YouTube is competing directly with Spotify. Oh, hang on, Netflix is now viewing them both as a competitor. And so Netflix is looking to put podcasts onto their platform as well as creator content onto their platform. So you end up with people or markets as well and sectors that you never saw as in competition with each other. Newspapers here in the UK, many of them now have their own TV content, video content, going direct toe-to-toe with the broadcasters who have always dominated the audio-visual space for news, and they're now in competition again. When you think, oh, well, that's bad enough, these are all at least media companies. Walmart in the States has bought, a TV manufacturer so that they then own their operating system and they'll be able to release content direct to their audiences. Samsung, LG, all of the device manufacturers that you've got your fridge that talks to you, but hang on, they're also investing tons of money in the content space, because when you turn on your LG TV, they don't want you watching Netflix, they want you watching the LG channels, because then they can start carving out that little bit of the ad market and more of your time with your eyeballs. So that concept of convergence, fragmentation and convergence, these are the two big trends. They aren't changing, they are here to stay, and that fundamentally affects television. So anytime anyone goes back to this is just a blip, this is a COVID blip, this is an inflation blip, this is a end of the streaming wars blip, that's not the case. Because of these two underlying trends, this is our new normal.
And in amongst all of that, why did you feel compelled to start a Substack where you really dig into these issues?
I've spent my entire career working in television. I started my career as a journalist for the BBC and I worked across TV, radio and online. I was at Xbox, doing interactive TV for Xbox. I managed channel4.com. I've always been in that space where the internet exists. I've always been quite fascinated by the internet and television and how those two things come together. And over the last 10 years as a consultant, I've worked with tons and tons of TV producers, both through particular types of training programs, but also just on one-to-one where they want to develop business strategies for how they crack the internet. What does this mean? How do I get my business to survive and thrive in this crazy world? And through that process, I realized they would say to me, how do you know all this stuff? And it's like, well, I read a lot and I listen to this and I read this and I follow these people and I do this. And you can see their hearts sinking because they're like, I don't have time for all of that. And I thought, well, there does feel to me a little bit of a gap in the market for something that is really specifically targeted at producers, because there's so much information out there and so much brilliant information out there. But I just thought for producers, they just need to know this particular group of content to help them develop their skills, develop their businesses and plan for the future. So it's very focused on TV people, especially TV people who make content. And then separately, there was a little bit of element of practice what you preach. I'm telling producers all the time they need to have a direct-to-consumer offering. Well, now I have a direct-to-consumer offering and I'm making my own mistakes. I've done a lot of setting up of newsletters and podcasts and YouTube channels, but it's always for other brands. This is the first time I've actually done it for myself. And so I can feel the uncomfortableness, especially for TV producers and that mindset where you make for other people. I'm living that at the moment. And so I can also really empathise with producers, how they feel like some of this stuff really does make their teeth itch, and it is a real sentiment and something that in a way you just got to get over.
Yeah, you're right. When you go direct to consumer like that, it is more vulnerable. We're struggling with this in Australia and you're in the UK. What big trends are you seeing as the industry there tries to work through this transition period?
I mean, in some ways these stories are universal, and the other, each country has its own specific experiences. So the American story often becomes the dominant story, which is this is what's happening in the US. YouTube's done this, cable's dead, blah, blah, blah. It's very similar narrative that people like telling. It's not necessarily the same as what's happened in the UK. So in the UK, there was a huge amount of innovation within broadcasters around the internet, certainly from the early 2000s. Channel 4 launched 4OD in 2006. I was the launch manager of that, and that was a very exciting and stressful time, I can tell you that. BBC launched iPlayer roughly in the same window, and they were free. That's, I think, what's a key difference. They were free. People were really trained as a population to assume that if I miss that show, well, then in probably about an hour, I can pick it up online. That became a very accepted user behaviour. You got used to that. You got used to catch up, missing broadcasts and watching catch up. And you also got used to the idea of massive archives of content being available, free to watch. And there was still download to own and download to rent. Apple and iTunes and Amazon were all in that space. But the broadcasters themselves largely didn't get into the paid space at all. So then the rise of Netflix in the States, which happened for completely different reasons, that wasn't contained in the States, obviously, because the internet's global. And so when that came and happened in the UK, it had exactly the same upending of the business model in terms of fragmentation, in terms of all of these other trends that I've talked about, and then that downward pressure on broadcasters and individual budgets that happened for the same reasons that happen in other territories. But it's just been slightly different. So that pattern of, if the US is paid via cable, original cable TV, then paid via subscriptions, then ad-funded tiers come in, and then free, like Tubi and all of these types of competitors, where it's moving to free. The UK was in reverse. We were free, then come subscriptions, and then in a way back to free, and free with YouTube. So it's just a slightly different story. On top of that, the BBC had a couple of really unpredicted massive costs in a particular year, a coronation and a royal funeral. These are massive costs that hit the BBC. So all these things came together at once that had put huge pressure on the independent production sector. And the nature of the UK's production sector it's hugely based on freelancers. Lots of independent production companies, lots of broadcasters making content, and a huge movable freelance market where you pick and choose which jobs you want to do. Well, suddenly, when the volume of content went down by a significant chunk, that left a lot of freelancers out of work and continuing to be out of work. And it's a very tragic and personal story for the people who are involved in this. And so there's a lot of people now looking around going, well, if this isn't going to come back, well, what do I do? Where do I go? Where do my opportunities sit? Where do my skills sit? Do I transition out of the media entirely? Do I move to a different sector? What do I do? And so there's that big unknown that's a very human story.
There's a lot of similarities in what you're saying to the Australian market. In amongst all of that, globally, what are the challenges and what are the opportunities you see for producers and people who've been in that traditional media model in the landscape right now?
I mean, it's easy and flippant for me to say this, but I also genuinely mean it. I think this is one of the most exciting times to be a producer. If you can tell audiovisual stories, if you've come through the broadcast ecosystem that has incredibly high standards, especially around editorial, especially around compliance, especially around contributor management if you're working in unscripted. You know all the pitfalls. The opportunities here are massive. If you can come up with ideas, manage to package them up and pitch them and sell them and convince someone to give you a lot of money and then produce those stories in a way that attract massive audiences and people want to watch, well, that is a key skill that if you look to the creator market and also branding, if you look to the brand market, they just don't have that pedigree. They don't have that background. They're often individuals who are learning by doing, dare I say, as hobbyists. And fair play to them, go for it. But that's the route that they're coming through. They're learning themselves through their own trial and error and their own mistakes. If you've got those chops because you've done it at the coalface of TV, even if you're relatively new in your career, or even if you're not, even if you're at the other end of your career, my goodness, it's worth its weight in gold. The demand for content hasn't changed. People still want to watch content. What has changed is how you make money out of that content, and also probably a slightly different sensibility around what quality looks like and what authenticity looks like. But if you're a TV producer, well, you're pretty well used to considering these types of editorial sticky issues through the process of making television programs. You've thought about story, you've thought about the nuts and bolts and logistics of production, you've thought about authenticity and narrative and all of those issues that actually are right at the heart of what is happening in this new space. So my belief is that there's a huge opportunity here. The challenge, well, it is, as we know, that the whole model of TV is this incredibly admirable and efficient system that enables the broadcaster to shoulder the risk and the producer to do what they do best, which is make the content. And if it's a successful show, everyone's happy. The broadcaster makes money through advertising and the producer gets paid. They keep their production fee and hopefully there'll be some sort of back end that comes off the back of it. That's what's been upended. So the challenge, and it's not a small challenge, I'm not waving my hands away about it, this is a massive issue for how you get projects financed, how comfortable producers are of self-financing or finding new forms of finance, the comfort they have with risk, but also the requirement to, I was going to say decomplexify, that's not a word. I once had a conversation with a producer who makes high-end TV shows for streamers, unscripted. And when I explained how YouTube works, the light bulb went off in her head and goes, oh, imagine not having as many viewings. Imagine how much you could save if you didn't have all those viewings. The minute you get into that, you go, oh God, yeah, actually, so much of our time is about going through these gatekeeping, important within the TV ecosystem or the streaming ecosystem. When you take them out, what happens to your costs? So that willingness to take risks is important, and that willingness to also just really reevaluate the way you do things and say, is this really necessary? Some of it is. Health and safety is. Legal issues are. And responsibility to your cast and crew, 100%. But other bits of it, maybe there are places that you can cut, like however many viewings you have per series, that type of thing.
Yeah, and I think also there are opportunities to make some of the things that we make with smaller crews and just go, well, we're not going to have that drone shot. That kind of approach as well is possible to rethink. How important is D2C or direct to consumer becoming right now? How important is it that we sort of own, not rent those audiences moving forward?
I think in 2 years, maybe 4, I'm not very good at predictions, and we won't be talking about it. It's just business as usual. So it is utterly essential for everyone. Production companies have to do it. What that means for each individual production company might be different things. Direct to consumer covers a whole host of activities and channels and routes. It doesn't have to be just a YouTube channel. But most producers are doing it anyway. They've already got a D2C play. They're on, X, or they're on Facebook, or they're on Instagram. They're already there. They're on TikTok. So, or you've got a mailing list. That's direct to consumer. You're already in this space. You just need to see it as owning a relationship with the people who love you. They're the people who want to work with you, or the people who love your shows. Why wouldn't you want that relationship? And it's not an either or. It's not, oh, we're a business to business company and that's all we do, or we're a direct to consumer company and that's all we do. This world, that convergent world that I talked about, it's everything. You're both business to business and you're both direct to consumer, because that's the nature of the beast. And the benefits of it are several. If you have a very clear direct-to-consumer strategy for your company, it creates a direct route to the people who love your shows, and also the people who want to work with you, or contributors who want to bring you ideas, or whatever it happens to be. But it also acts as a hedge. It gives you a protective layer that you own that audience. You're not dependent on your network or whatever who own that audience on your behalf that you have no access to. You can monetize that audience either through advertising, or you can upsell stuff to them. You might have merch, you might have, I don't know, a podcast going out, whatever. You've got a route to monetize those people. Whether you choose to or not is up to you. It also acts as a place that you can test ideas. So you can try out ideas, you can prove something works, so that when you are trying to sell something to someone else, like you might be selling to a network or whatever it happens to be, you have something to point to say this worked and here is my evidence. So you've got that testing ground. And for brands and increasingly commissioners, they, I think, increasingly see it as an additional marketing channel rather than a competitor. So if you scroll back maybe even 4 years and you said, oh, well, I can do X, Y, and Z through my own channels, they would go, oh, are you in competition with us? Now they just see it as an additional route to make the footprint of the thing that you're doing bigger, especially for brands. So in general, it is a core part of what you should be doing anyway. And even if it's just an email list, even if it's just a Facebook group, people who love you, why wouldn't you want to be able to talk to them and speak to them directly? I've spoken to production companies. A lot of them go, we're a B2B brand. Our brand is not consumer facing. Why not? It just happens to have been that in the past. It doesn't have to be in the future. Maybe you need to tweak your brand a little bit to make it a little bit more consumer facing. There's no book that says, oh, this brand must always stay B2B, when you can see that a lot of B2B brands are all making that transition to B2C anyway. Tons of them are opening up direct to consumer channels. I think that's a core part, is once you understand that the internet is about the ability for people to make connections with each other, not mediated through someone, that's sort of the light bulb moment that goes, oh, I can have a B2C, a direct-to-consumer business or B2C business, or a strand within my business, and actually that's completely within my control. And that's actually quite seductive and empowering for people when they realise that.
We are an audience-facing business, so being able to talk directly to that audience and do things like build community and help with discoverability of the stories that you want to tell in a very crowded market, I mean, that is gold.
Yeah. And I have to say, it's incredibly thrilling. When if you know what it's like, you work in TV, you wait for the overnight, so you wait for what the figures look like. And that's like, yeah, we got this, oh dear, everyone go to the pub because they're all really sad because the viewing figures weren't great. It's basically that, but it's immediate and you control and own it. And then you control and own how you deal with that information. It's not like, oh, the viewing figures weren't great. That's a shame. I don't like how it was scheduled. I don't like how it was marketed. oh, if only I'd done this, the title wasn't great, but that's what the broadcaster wanted. We all know those chats. It was the title that was wrong. We all know that. But there's nowhere to hide here. If you get audience engagement with your content, that's a rush. But if you don't, that's a bit crushing and I've got nowhere to go. So you try something else.
You can do things like A/B test. You can change, you can adjust. There's a
Yeah.
flexibility that there isn't when you're handing over your show to a network and then, the next thing you know, there's a trailer on television and, you're waiting for those numbers. So it's a very different equation. Jen, let's talk about YouTube. Why is everyone talking about YouTube? What is really going on?
YouTube is a beast. It is the cleverest buy that Google ever made. The guys who created it, I love that they created it originally to be a dating platform. The idea was that you would upload a video of yourself going, hi. And then when it didn't go anywhere, but they realized, oh, hang on, a video sharing platform, that's quite something. YouTube is fundamentally at its heart trying to be the world's video app, video platform. And there are so many dimensions to it, but in its most simple, there are three elements. There's video, there's monetization, and there's community. To talk about video first, it's got the classic 16:9 TV-esque format, which leans into longer form. So when I say longer form, it can be hours, but it's also sort of 14 minutes plus. You're looking into that space. It's got shorts, which is the vertical format, which is YouTube's competitor to TikTok and Instagram Reels. And they are harder to monetize, short and snappy, very, very brief length in content, but it's a great way to really get into the algorithm and then drive people to that longer form. It's got live, so live streaming. Alongside live streaming, it has a chat function, so you can sit there talking to your audience with them talking along with you. And then it's got a little thing that I always think is really interesting to TV type people and film people is premieres. So you can bookmark a page and say, come here at this time and we will premiere content. And then you can have that live chat along the side if you want to, alongside that content. So it's got like a premiere type system that is not dissimilar to a broadcast type system. So that's video. The second bit is monetization. So it's Google, it's Google AdSense. It's the same thing that comes up when you see the search results, when you type something into Google. It's the same fundamental engine behind all of that. It's when you see videos, adverts appearing in stream, you can hit skip, some of them are unskippable. It's got ad placements all around the page. And on that content, YouTube takes a share of it. You get 55%, YouTube gets 45% of it. That's usually the way it works. And that, from their perspective, is to pay for the streaming costs and the tech and blah, blah, blah. And that's how they make money. But if you do sponsorship, if you do brand deals, if you've got a cookery channel and you're standing there cooking and the wok is from blah, blah, then they pay you and that YouTube take none of that. They don't control that environment at all. So there's a whole host of monetization opportunities in there, which either you do directly yourself or you use Google AdSense. And it's not an either or, you do both. And then the final element is community. So anyone can create an account. Anyone can create a YouTube channel and anyone can come and chat on your pages, and then they can subscribe to you if they really like you. The most lively channels you can see is tons and tons of conversation underneath the content. So those are the key main elements. There's lots of other stuff within YouTube that is sort of worth mentioning. So there's the content ID system, which is dealing with copyright. So if any of your material is uploaded, you can say, this is my material, and then you can either track it and then take the money from it if it sits on someone else's channel, or you can pull it down. It then is acknowledged as your copyright. There's things like a store, so you can buy content, DTO, DTR, films, TV series. There's YouTube TV, which is in the US. I'm not sure if it's in other territories, which is their competitor to cable. So instead of paying Comcast or whatever for your package of cable content, and maybe some sports packages, you can pay a monthly fee to YouTube, which costs roughly the same as a cable contract, but you are not tied into a contract and it's just via your internet. You'll get, Discovery Channel and whatever, and whatever sports you particularly like, whatever they offer within that package. So that's a very specific cable competitor. And then there's things like games. So they've got YouTube Playables, which is a gaming environment, same as Netflix has games. It's the same concept. So there's other stuff within the ecosystem, but the main beast of it is that video, monetization, and community. And crucially for them, they are seeing increasing demand for watching on the TV set. So I think it's up to half of the viewing of YouTube in the US is on the TV set. And so that's why they love TV people. and film people, because we're really used to making long form content that can capture attention in the living room. YouTube is an audio-visual narrative storytelling platform. TV producers make audio-visual narrative stories. I'm sort of shrugging my shoulders. It's like, this is your platform. This is yours. You have to be there. Like, if you're not there, why? And I get why. I'm being flippant. I know why, because of the business and the economics and a whole host of other reasons. But when you really strip it back, this is the platform to tell audiovisual narrative stories and find an audience. And you can find an audience, and it's global. That's the other thing that I think is so crucial about YouTube, is that television by its nature is often quite it's global and it's local. So you make content for your local market. You'll make it for the Aussie market, or you'll make it for the UK market, or in the UK it might be for, you make it for the Scottish audience or whatever it happens to be. But then you try and sell those shows internationally. If you're making stuff for a niche that in Australia or the UK is too small, like say it's for knitters or people who like gardening, or Generation X who really are into indie music, well, maybe in that territory it's just too small. But globally, actually together, I can find a niche that actually becomes quite a decent chunky size, that I then have something that I can really talk to. And then when you're talking to that global niche, you then can talk to advertisers in each of those territories, because most ads don't, and most brands don't, I'm going to make a generalization here, largely go territory by territory. So you can say, well, I can talk to gardeners in Australia and there'll be Bunnings that I want to sponsor that channel, where here in the UK it will be Homebase, and they're not in conflict with each other. You can talk out of your mouth to whole different territories to make money. I think also for TV producers, right now, there is an element where you might be reading my Substack, of course you are, or you're listening to this podcast, or you're reading trade press, or you're watching videos, or you're pondering all of this stuff. There's a really strong element of learn by doing. TV people, by definition, are practitioners. They are craftspeople. They are makers. That's the word. Production. To be in this space, you have to get into it. And once you get into it, you realise very quickly, A, there's a lot to learn, but B, this is not rocket science. You're not being asked to reinvent the wheel here. These are known tools, known behaviours, and it's reaching audiences. And it's about telling stories. You know how to do all of that. That's where I think, just to put a little note of difference, a lot of people who work in my part of television, in the digital part of television, there are a lot of really complex parts of that world, especially around technology, technologists, engineering, architecture. That space is incredibly complicated. To be able to build and run and manage loads on a Netflix or a streaming platform is a brain-bleedingly complicated job that I do not even begin to understand. Well, I understand it vaguely, but I couldn't even tell you at all how to do it. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the job of creating content, making an account on YouTube, reading the data. There's no technical skills in here beyond those that a television producer already has, which is how do you use cameras, how do you edit stuff, how do you write a script, lighting, sound, where are you storing stuff, what's your offline, what's your online. All of that stuff is known. It's within the TV market already. So there is no great technical complexity. There's skills that you need to learn, but there's no great technical complexity. And I personally have seen TV producers, some of the best TV producers in the world, sit there and go, oh, I don't understand this internet thing. Oh, it's a bit scary. Don't get it. And then when they actually engage in it, they start doing, they go, oh, so we do this, this, and this. Oh, okay. Yeah, I get it. Okay, why don't we try this? And immediately that happens, they're away. And then they've understood that this is just an additional way of telling stories or engaging with users or taking them on a journey. And it isn't terrifying anymore. So for me, my strongest encouragement is to get into this space. You don't have to make it a big grand plan. Just get into this space. And the worst case is after a period of time, you've learned what doesn't work. Unscripted has naturally been this environment on these spaces. Cost of production, there's less complexity around rights as well. So, if you put in a scripted show from its broadcast into a YouTube environment, then there's often a lot of rights around music, etc. That means that it gets pulled down, or etc. by studios. But if you're originating for this platform, unscripted has naturally been the place, because it's harder, isn't it, to get good performance. You can see the edges, you can see the mechanics at work in cheaper production, especially if it's cheaper production by, say, creators who haven't necessarily come up through a TV broadcast environment. But increasingly, that's less the case. If you look at someone like Alan's Universe, he's spending $120,000 per episodes are normally about 20 minutes. Is that competitive with a US broadcast sitcom? Probably not. Is it competitive with, say, a Channel 4 online comedy blap? Yes, it is. And he's monetizing that globally. And then he's just sold his package of rights of his sitcom to Roku. And it's a classic old school distribution deal, isn't it? And then if you look towards some of these other new genres, like the Chinese short form drama apps that are coming out, this is basically Days of Our Lives, right? It's even, dare I say, slightly lower quality than Days of Our Lives, but it's highly addictive, scandal laden. Oh my God, the doctor's actually really married to his sister? No, it's that type of content, and people love it.
That's getting millions and millions and millions of views. I mean, people do love it. Like, at some point, we've all got to go, well, there is an audience for those things. But in amongst all this, Jen, I mean, what's holding people back? Why aren't more freelancers and producers jumping into YouTube?
You just heard part 1 of a 2-part interview. Come back next week for the second part.
We Interrupt This broadcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation and the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and we acknowledge them as the traditional custodians and first storytellers of these regions. Always was, always will be.